Masters of martial arts do exist. Despite being unknown to society, I am one of them. In the grocery store sales area, a gray-haired man with his hand raised finished his story, embarrassing the cashier across the counter. Was that nonsense? The boy looked at his old grandfather in complete confusion. It was obvious that his evening was not going well. When the first afternoon classes at the old Chona school were about to end 12 hours ago, the students were still seated at their desks. The two men were standing in a small nook near the school's main building. One of them had his hands in his pockets. The other was making some kind of incomprehensible gesture with his hands in the air, turning his palms out, and the child in the gray shirt was giggling uncontrollably. The hooligan yelled something inane about some divine teachings of the Hukan sect, then struck another boy who was in the alley. The impact was so powerful that the schoolboy was flung several meters away. The Dyuki made his partner laugh, asking why he hadn't just beaten the victim for money. The bully told his accomplice that if he watched Huck Chan's divine fist, he would probably become a fan too. Suddenly, the two were speaking, was broken by a third voice. The boy, who was lying on the ground, identified himself as Kong Hyan, an 18-year-old high school student. He went down on one knee and informed the offenders that, although Huck Chan's divine fist had an intriguing plot, he missed most of it due to a lack of funds. Clenching his fists, he muttered that everything on the show was exaggerated compared to real fights, and that it was unlikely that anyone would be capable of replicating that in real life. He lunged at one of the attackers in a split second. He saw a move from his MMA class and yelled at the bully, "You don't have a chance against real fighting moves," the boy in the shirt asked. He had no trouble stopping the counterattack by punching the boy in the face with his fist. The schoolboy's body flew off again due to inertia. When the boy was even further away, his bully mocked him and asked him, ironically, where he got his courage and strength from approaching the victim. The vile type looked at the boy with contempt and rage-filled eyes, and he started pounding the schoolboy ruthlessly, shouting that he was just a poor orphan who should behave properly. "If you keep acting like this, I'm going to beat you even harder," the bully yelled, striking the boy. The troublemaker heard a voice from behind him and turned to find the source of the noise. It was Woanen, a pretty girl with short hair and eyes the color of the ocean, who told him to stop right away. She was sternly staring at the people who were abusing the schoolboy and calling the girl derogatory names. The bully demanded that she go her own way if she didn't want to cooperate. She didn't want to get into trouble, so his partner tried to stop him by blocking the tall guy's path. As he continued, he called out to the troublemakers, asking them what they had just said. It turned out that the young man was Wong Tessin, and he turned to face the bullies, reminding them that he was. The boy asked, looking angrily at the rascal in the gray shirt, "Would you rather I play with you then? Or would you rather run away from here?" The two hooligans apologized and quickly left the alley. Tessin ran up to Ahan, asking if she was hurt. She replied, "I don't need any help," and they walked over to Hygiene, who was sitting on the ground. A peer helped him up and told him to forget about those guys. Akan, who had moved aside, then asked the defeated man, "Why are you messing with those hooligans?" She got no response, so the girl turned around and glared at Hyene, telling her that, in that situation, it would be better for her to accept defeat than to try to stop the beating. Finally, she told Hyene that, if he didn't like what she had just said, he could keep being a punching bag. Tion hurried after the leaving girl, suggesting that they go together, but the boy remained on the ground. Tess's attempts to get Han to meet him after school were met with confusion and resentment from around the corner. Hayne slapped his fist on his knee, struggling to stand up and shocked by his classmates' haughtiness. Clutching his fist, Hagen said that he already had to work through his part-time job and all of the money he had set aside. A few hours later, in the training room, the boy heard terrible news from the coach. He suggested that the boy continue training. The boy said he would definitely pay for the lessons. Later, the trainer explained that after 6 months of lessons, hygiene was progressing well and money had nothing to do with it because, as you can see, your body usually starts to grow after about 6 months. Aside, I went to MMA training. I'll practice and I can beat those assholes, the boy said, raising his eyes. The boy's small frame caught the mentor's attention. The mentor stood up and commented that Hagen's body hadn't changed since the first class. The mentor shrugged his shoulders. The jock retorted that it seemed the child's body didn't want to change. The mentor patted the boy on the shoulder and said that continuing the training seemed pointless to him. As a result, he would refund the boy's payment for the lessons. Late at night fell on the streets of South Korean City. The convenience store was getting ready for the night shift, and the boy squatted between the rows of food as he considered the coach's words and concluded that the teacher was the first to give up. The boy tried to change the coach's mind, saying he would try even harder, but it was all in vain. All about persistence. The man decided to study at home alone because he had mastered the program and could save money. However, as he considered his options, he realized that if he exercised in between part-time jobs, he could pick up another extra shift. When he started doing squats, he noticed that as soon as he sat down for the fourth time, a sharp pain shot through his entire body. The pain was so bad that it turned his eyes black. He started coughing and dropped the grocery crate on the ground, falling to his knees. This wasn't the first time the man had experienced this kind of pain, but it had been happening more often lately. He tried to hold back his tears and thought he should take some vitamins immediately. At that point, there were two shouts behind the boy's back, indicating that someone was making loud threats. Immediately after, a second voice was heard apologizing to the first. He turned to investigate and saw three men standing outside the store window, one of whom was a large man wearing a shirt who was gripping an elderly man by the arm and accusing him of stealing something. The gray-haired man refuted the accusation, saying that he had simply moved on. A moment later, a large man in a white shirt punched the elderly man in the face and threw him aside. The man claimed he was simply venting his anger that had built up during the day on someone. Turning to his accomplice, the big man asked his friend if he should continue beating the elderly man. The gray-haired man begged for mercy as he sat on his knees, but Hyan abruptly fled into the street and reported loudly the news that two men were assaulting an elderly man outside of a Hobok branch store. The boy mouthed into the phone for the police to arrive as soon as possible. The hooligans chose to flee as soon as possible, and as he did, the large man in the white shirt pointed his finger at Hagen and yelled that he remembered him, and that they would meet again. The boy then approached the elderly man and inquired as to whether the boy said he was okay, but the man asked if he had really called the police, pointing to his phone hygiene and saying he was just pretending and didn't want to call so he wouldn't get into too much trouble. Later, the boy helped the old man get up, and the stranger thanked him, pointing out that not many people these days were willing to help strangers. The boy nodded, saying he still couldn't stand people like those two bastards. The boy concluded that those hooligans had purposefully kicked the man's legs, thinking that he was an easy target. The old man was heavily reliant on one of the boys. The story reached the point where it all started when the man stood with his hand raised after dumping a bunch of strange information on Heen. Looking at the old man, the boy thought that this type first asked him about his parents and then suddenly started talking. There are only 3 remaining martial arts factions in South Korea, according to the old man. The royal company uses martial arts for aggression and control of the underworld. A new religious group called Shin religion believes in God and follows him. The unofficial government organization known as the Emperor, which oversees and controls martial arts affairs. The 3 factions had suddenly united to suppress the smaller alliances. He continued by saying that his own faction had also almost immediately merged into a separate alliance, but their association was caught in a cycle where the old man himself barely survived and hid from persecution for more than a decade, looking for safety from the 3 organizations' sheer power. Endless battles, intrigue, betrayals, the deaths of their close friends, and the agony that overtook their faction were all part of this. Looking away from the old man, Hyen said that at that moment he still thought that the strange stranger was just immersed in his imaginary world as he continued to play along. The boy asked if it was right to tell someone like him, but the old man explained that because of everything that had happened to him, he had been cautious when the boy mentioned the police, as it might have attracted the attention of those 3 factions. "Ah, that's it." Looking away from the old man, Hyen interrupted him, reminding him that he still hadn't responded to his question about his family. The stranger then inquired about the boy's parents once more, this time without making him appear insane. The boy answered that he didn't know anything about his parents because they had passed away when he was still a child. The boy became irate and asked why the stranger was inquiring about his family at the same time that a jade-colored shroud covered the gray-haired man's eyes. Abruptly, he reached out to Hagen and touched the hero's chest with 2 fingers. The boy watched the elderly man in a daze. He withdrew his hand and said that the boy's meridians were blocked. When the boy asked what meridians were, the stranger explained that they were the channels via which ki energy flowed through the human body. The stranger said that a normal person had several meridians open, but the boy's meridians were blocked. The boy asked, confused, how the chi energy was related to what had previously been stated. The stranger remained silent and mentioned something about 6 months. There was nothing left to torture his body into. The old man spoke of a recent bout of pain, saying even the smallest exercise would cause him unbearable pain, and if he continued to torture his body in this way, the ki energy would soon flow backwards, leading to death. When Hagen asked him about it, he answered that he knew the boy was studying hard, but that the boy's body wasn't changing at all. The stranger then muttered that the body should grow when ki energy is flowing, but that because Han's meridians are blocked, he would not be able to grow and vice versa, putting the body under needless stress. The boy's mind flashed. Looking into the boy's eyes, the stranger said he could guess the situation the boy was in, but is this situation more important than life at the end? The gray-haired man gave the child 2 options: give up or find another way after all. There are attempts in this world that are preferable to turning to Hagen. He was taken aback when, after hearing the same thing from several people for the 2nd time in a day, he considered everything that had happened to him lately and came to the realization that giving up would be easier than suffering through this kind of situation. The boy slammed his hand on the table and turned to face the elderly man, saying, "I didn't get a proper family education, so I didn't learn to give up in time," Hyen whispered angrily. The boy declared that he would undoubtedly grow stronger and crush all of his enemies. And that since he had made this decision, nobody could stop him. "I'm going to follow this path anyway, so either help me or just forget about it," the man said, finishing his gaze on the elderly man, who had remained motionless throughout the boy's monologue. The stranger stood, eyes downcast, examining the young cashier's unclean hand. As Hagen continued to stare at the man's unwashed palm, the thought that he was having an argument with a weirdo crossed his mind. Gathering his thoughts, he suggested that the elderly man call for an ambulance, but the stranger abruptly grabbed the man's hand, saying, "Well, it looks like there's no other way out." Hagen begged the stranger to let go of his hand, but the stranger responded by saying he had already witnessed people torture themselves until their bodies are destroyed. The old man muttered that he didn't like the situation as a whole, but if he left it that way, the child would keep abusing himself until he passed away while staring at Hagen in the eye. The stranger then declared that he would now open his meridians in response to the boy's plea. Cries, the gray-haired man gave him a firm order to remain still while glaring menacingly at the child. The elderly man also added that he should not make any noise. After a brief handshake, the stranger bowed his head over the table, and the older man leaned on his cane and lamented that he hadn't used his ki energy in a while. Finally, he headed for the supermarket exit. He said that the boy would have to feel much better now, feeling nothing but disappointment. The kid stood like that until the old man disappeared into the depths of the dark alleys. After several long hours, the guy's shift at the convenience store ended. Hagen staggered through the nooks and crannies, thinking that the world he lived in was huge, and that there were so many fucked up people in it. Ki meridians, it's like something. The boy was thinking, out of a martial arts mana, I'm living in the 21st century. What a load of crap, as he attempted to understand how his life had turned out. However, in the next moment, a man's hand blocked his path, and Hajin realized that he was in trouble again. Now, just wait a little while, kid, it'll all be over soon. I told you we'd meet again. It was the 2 hooligans who had just moments earlier. A while back, the big man in the blue business suit smiled and approached his partner, asking cheerfully what was wrong and grabbing Hagen by the neck. The guy in the gray shirt laughed and said that he was obviously a nerd, even though he was trying to fight back. That they realized right away that the police call was fake and that he liked to rip off defenseless people like Hagen. The boy listened as the bully asked him if he was tired of living a righteous life. The vile types. However, a moment later, the boy used his free hand to grab the large man's finger and snapped it. The bully then knelt down and grabbed the boy's right index finger, which he then violently broke while in excruciating pain. Hagen was taken aback that the bastard was only lamenting a broken finger. The boy also commented on how much fun it was to watch the two Ashol flee as the large man in the gray shirt hurried to attack. After settling down, the boy made the decision to focus on the thug's movements and actions. The hero made the decision to use the counterattack strategy, which requires the boy to dodge and hit back right away. After a brief pause, he swung to strike his opponent in the face, but just as he was about to strike, something happened that he had never experienced in a fight before. The opponent across from him appeared to simply stand motionless at the same moment, and small pulses ran down his arm like a chain. These were likely the QE energy running along the meridians. It felt to him as though time had virtually stopped, and he was free to act. There was no avoiding the hit, as the explosive force struck the bully in front of him. The force of the impulse was so great that the guy behind him was also thrown back by the 5 bursts of energy that felt like they lightened his arm considerably and sped up the impact. At that moment the boy realized that this would be the first fight of his life, that he would finally win. The thugs, who had never seen anything like this before, recoiled in horror at the unknown phenomenon. When the dust cloud cleared, Hagen saw 2 hooligans lying at the other end of the alley without any signs of life. Both of them had torn clothing from the force of the explosion. The boy stood like a stumbling block, his face expressing denial of what had happened. The attacker's blast wave was so strong that it could be seen from across the block. "Are you feeling better now?" The boy tried to turn around but realized he couldn't. The mysterious stranger asked the child if he liked the power and if he now believed in chi and the existence of martial arts. As soon as he answered that, the same jade-colored energy aura immediately began to form around the old man's feet again. "You're still inexperienced, though. Well, it's only natural," the madman. Abrupt voice from behind me to Hagen's and said that he must be behaving indecently since he hadn't introduced himself. "I'm Park Jong-an, the leader of the Beggars Union, known as the General." Hygiene called out to the man. Jong-gun turned around and the old man muttered, glancing over his shoulder. The boy was still standing in the same pose in which he had knocked out the bullet. He said he couldn't move. The general approached the boy slowly and in one fell swoop lifted his body onto his shoulder. "That you're tired from releasing too much key energy." Moving toward the alley exit, he told the boy that it would be best for him to rest now so that he could gather his strength and not worry too much about everything that had happened. The boy was a little hesitant to answer this question, so he evasively said that he lived alone and had nothing to steal. The general was displeased with this formulation. The next instant, Hyen felt a sharp, intense pain in the area beneath his lower back, so shouted in the surprise courtyard. The old man had applied pressure to an acupuncture point, causing the boy's body to become extremely sensitive to any physical impact. The boy's plea for forgiveness was heard, and the man's mind replayed the fight and the situation. It had only been a few hours since he had opened the boy's meridians, but they were already extremely strong. This child had much more potential than Park. Jong-gon could have anticipated that at first light a large number of people would swarm the alley where the hooligans and Hagen battle had occurred the night before. Many in the throng likened the 2 lifeless corpses to sacred paintings, since they were both lying down with their arms crossed on their bellies. Wuan was one of the people who happened to see the bodies of the 2 drunks. She asked her friend who was holding her hand if she had seen enough and if they could leave. Aeon studied the bodies closely while standing in front of them silently. Ah's gaze was fixed on the men lying there, though something was causing some weariness and suspicion, even though there were no cuts, wounds or bruises on their bodies. Their shirts were torn as if they had been in a fight. "That's disgusting," shouted some girl. Many people recorded what happened on their phones. She sensed the presence of a man with unusual hair behind her, someone dangerous and powerful. Upon sensing something wasn't quite right, she looked around, and this time her senses didn't fail her. But he pushed through the crowd and made his way closer to the epicenter of the event. The man in the black business suit complemented the austere image of a serious and determined man staring at the back of the stranger's head. The girl wondered why the mysterious man would be so interested in two drunks lying in strange poses in an early morning alleyway. She also noticed that this strange man was much taller than any man she had ever met. A number of similarly odd people in business suits appeared all at once. Some were hurriedly talking on the phone, while others stood with their backs to the scene, seemingly guarding or waiting for something. The schoolgirl's friend interrupted her, asking, "Ahan, what are you thinking about again?" The girl, keeping her eyes on the strange people, replied nothing terrible had happened, realizing that she was thinking about today's test work. Her friend suggested that she go to school, to which the girl agreed. The boy dreamed of the general in the same instant that __ woke up in a cold sweat, screaming that he remembered everything. The boy saw his humble apartment, where there was no one around but him getting out of bed. At one point, the boy was almost convinced that the whole situation was not real, and that it was just another delirious dream on the background of. The general had simply carried him home, thinking that he would still have something to ask the older man. The boy attempted to stand up, but his eyes quickly darkened. Unable to remain upright, the boy fell to his knees, groaning in pain, but even so, the body refused to obey as his head fell to the floor. Heijin realized that his spine had also become, leaning on one arm and holding his chest with the other. The very frail boy realized that every effort he made was difficult, and that it felt as though his heart might burst at any moment. He looked around him at that moment and briefly lost consciousness, feeling as though he was flying. In a few more seconds, Hagen's consciousness returned, and he opened his eyes to see the ceiling of his apartment once more. Still in a semi-delirious state, the boy thought he was lying on a soft pillow and didn't understand why his body hurt so much. At the same time, his body was as light as a feather. The boy jumped to his feet and was horrified to find that his body had changed dramatically overnight. Raising his right arm, Haijin didn't recognize it. The perfect shape was accompanied by powerful veins from wrist to elbow, falling to his knees under the weight of his new body. The boy thought that after all, it wasn't the most important thing right now. Suddenly, a familiar voice, clamping his ears tightly in fear, spoke from the direction of the front door. Haijin raised his head, seeing a general standing near the entrance. He ordered the boy to stop making noise so as not to draw unnecessary attention. He waved his cane and told the boy to sit down. An incomprehensible haze started to ooze from his right ear. This blue substance is called qi. Hyen ran up to the old man in a rage and angrily asked the gray-haired man if this was all his doing. Jongun said, in amazement, that he had no idea what could have happened or how the guy could have grown so much in one night. Jongun's face was not as kind as it had been the previous night. Instead, he looked like a mentor, and his eyes looked sternly at the boy jumping up from the floor. In an attempt to get a response from Jongun Hyen, the general turned around and placed his hand on the schoolboy's back. The old man said that the boy's blood circulation was normal and there was nothing to worry about. When the boy grudgingly asked how the old man could have forgotten what he had done to him the night before, the man replied that he had just returned and had not seen the boy since he had carried him home in his arms. It started to flow out of his ears with a fresh vigor. The old man was shocked by this transformation because he had never seen anything like it before. The body did not change over time because the meridians of the man were blocked. Instead, the guides for K energy were opened, causing muscle changes to start. As for the appearance, the reason for the dramatic muscle growth was not because the meridians were opened. Rather, the general concluded that even though the boy trained himself and saw no results at all, it could be said that Ha-Jen achieved the body transformation on his own. You really worked hard. That after carrying the boy to the apartment, the thing was the general realized that the boy had grown about 20 cm overnight. The general looked into the boy's eyes and told him not to reveal his body while he was doing this. The general also reminded him to use martial arts as carefully as possible because if you leave too bright of a trail, the faction's bloodhounds will attack and it will only be a matter of time before Hagen is captured by the king god or emperor. The boy slammed them down, wondering if they couldn't just be plugged in with some headphones, but as soon as he covered his ears, chi began to ooze out through his nostrils. The guy tried to plug his nose as well, but the energy was already coming. Heian asked why this was, so the general replied that until the guy learned to control ki energy, he would leave his footprints everywhere. While trying to stop the ki from entering the boy's body, the old man turned to face him and said, "I, General, will take care of your training myself." Pinna suddenly asked the gray-haired man why he called himself a general. The case took place in Seoul in the year 1962 on the outskirts of a poor suburb. After checking in with everyone present, Beggars Union leader Kim Juba said that the world is going through a major change involving many people and circumstances, and that their faction, in order to adapt to the new reality, needed to keep up and be reborn into the new culture. Jongin said that he would tell him all about it now, and that called for a lot of adjustments. That day, the current General Park Jang-gun was only 8 years old, but he was already paying close attention to what the Union leader had to say. The first innovation Kim Jae-ban decided to put into practice was changing the leader's title to general. The solemnity with which the leader delivered this unimportant news initially put the followers in a state of shock, but after a short while, everyone shouted as one that this is wonderful news and the faction welcomes their general, who they greatly admire. No one could know, though, that the faction leader had only read epic poetry about war and that the new title had no significance. Then we are shown the scene of Hwasun clan, where the leader of the Hwasun clan is saying, "What general?" Then we are shown the subordinate of the Hoanon clan who is telling the leader of the Hwasun clan, the leader of the Beggar Union, has changed his title to general. And an official document has also been issued. When you hear this, the leader of the Hwasun clan is thinking in his mind, "Is it English? How cool. I am feeling very jealous." Then the leader of the Hwasun clan shouts at his second subordinate, "But hey, you can speak English. Then tell me the English meaning of Hwasun." First the subordinate thinks something and then says volcano. Then the Hwasun clan leader announces that from today you all will call me Volcano instead of Chief. Then the scene changes, and the Mudong clan leader is shown, who changes the name of his clan to Shaman. In the last we show the Jongnam clan leader, then Te also changes the name of his clan to Ocean, and that is how the unspoken tradition came to an end. Hei Jin holds his nose and ears and says what a strange tradition. The old man told the boy to take his time and not jump into things, which scared him. He realized he had to go to school immediately and barely had time to ask what time it was. The boy then took a hard blow to the jaw, passed out, and lost consciousness for a long while. The last thing Hien remembered was the moment the old man stabbed him in the chest with 2 fingers.